In the waters of Central Africa, there are stories about something that lived in the rivers. Something enormous, something that seemed impossible to kill. They called it Gustaf, a crocodile so large that some people claimed it was bigger than any Nile crocodile they had ever seen. A predator that, according to local stories, had survived bullets, traps, and countless attempts to hunt it down. A hunter that killed over 300 people. For years, people living near Lake Tanganyika and the Ruzizi River spoke about the same animal. A giant crocodile, scarred, old, and terrifyingly patient. But like many stories that spread across the wild, the legend of Gustaf slowly grew larger than the animal itself. Because depending on who you ask, Gustaf was either a monstrous killer that haunted the rivers for years, or simply a crocodile whose reputation became something much bigger. So what really happened? Was Gustaf truly the giant predator people feared, or did the legend take on a life of its own? To understand that story, we first have to understand the world where Gustaf lived. Lake Tanganyika is one of the largest freshwater lakes on Earth. Stretching across Central Africa, it holds more water than almost any other lake on the continent. Its shoreline touches several countries, and its rivers feed into villages where people rely on the water every single day. Fishermen launch wooden boats before sunrise, families wash clothes along the banks, and children play in the shallows. But beneath the surface of those waters, something else is watching. In waters like these, the danger isn't what you see, it's what you don't. Because this region is also home to one of the most powerful predators in Africa, the Nile crocodile, a reptile that has survived on Earth for millions of years.
And the tail and the little feet are poking out. It's like...
A predator built perfectly for ambush. They can remain motionless for hours, with only their eyes and nostrils above the surface, waiting, and when the moment comes, they strike with explosive speed. For animals drinking at the water's edge, the attack can happen in seconds. A splash, violent roll, and then silence. In places where people live close to rivers and lakes, encounters with crocodiles are not uncommon. Fishermen had learned to live with them. They knew the danger, they knew the signs, but every once in a while a single animal begins to stand out. Over time, fishermen and villagers began noticing something strange. One crocodile kept appearing again and again. Not just any, a very large one. Larger than most people had ever seen. And over time, the stories begin. Stories about the crocodile that everyone started calling Gustaf. Nile crocodiles are already formidable predators. Their bite force is among the strongest in the animal kingdom. They hunt with patience, they are terrifying, but not even close to Gustaf. This one was much older, smarter, more cautious, and when a regular Nile crocodile usually grows up to 5 meters long, some people claim Gustaf was over 6 meters long. Longer than a small boat. But no one ever measured him. Well, for obvious reasons, because he killed over 300 people. And in the water, size can be deceiving. With size, however, came the age. He could have been over 60 years old. That's an age very few predators ever reach in the wild. Gustaf may have weighted somewhere between 800 kilograms to 1 ton, far heavier than most Nile crocodiles that weighed between 270 kilograms.
800 solid ass pounds.
And that's pretty crazy already, considering Nile crocodile hatchlings are typically about 30 centimeters long and weigh approximately 60 grams at birth. Fishermen said Gustaf seemed to avoid traps, others claimed it had deep scars across its body, hunters claimed bullets had been fired at it before. Yet the crocodile kept appearing again. But long before the stories, long before the name, Gustaf was just another crocodile, or at least that's how it started. Somewhere along the muddy banks of a river connected to Lake Tanganyika, a female crocodile had buried her eggs beneath the warm soil, hidden from predators, guarded carefully, waiting. For weeks, nothing happened. Then one day, the eggs began to move. From inside the shells, tiny crocodiles started making sounds. They were calling out these high-pitched chirps before they had even seen the world. And their mother heard them. She returned to the nest, carefully digging through the dirt until the first small head emerged. Fragile, no larger than a human hand, hard to imagine that something so small could become one of the most feared predators in the water. The mother picked them up gently in her jaws, one by one, and carried them to the river. A place where their real lives would begin. But the water is not safe, not for a hatchling, not even close. Fish can eat them, birds can snatch them from the surface, even other crocodiles can kill them. In fact, most of them will not survive their first year. Only a few will make it. And among them, Gustaf was doing everything he could to survive. At first, life is simple. Stay hidden, stay close to the edges and wait. Young crocodiles don't hunt large prey. They feed on insects, small fish, anything that they can catch. And more importantly, anything they can catch without being seen. Because in the early stages of life, being noticed is the greatest danger of all. For years, Gustaf lived in the shadows. Not as a legend, not as a monster, just another crocodile trying to survive. Eat or disappear was the rule here. And he ate a lot. He successfully survived his first year and was already beating the odds of survival. And he grew bigger and stronger every day, slowly outgrowing every animal in this river, even his siblings. The water was his world, and in that world, survival followed a simple rule. Wait long enough and something will come to you. One evening, as the light began to fade over the river, an animal approached the water, careless, focused only on drinking. The surface was still. Gustav didn't move, not a ripple, not a sound, just eyes, barely above the surface. And then he struck. The water exploded, a violent surge of power, jaws snapping shut with incredible force. The animal didn't have time to react. 1 second it stood at the edge of the river, and the next it was gone, dragged beneath the surface. For a crocodile, this is everything, timing and precision, and Gustav was getting better at all of it. Over time, the prey became larger. He started with small mammals or antelopes and slowly grew large enough to hunt livestock or wildebeest. He didn't rush anymore, he waited for the perfect moment, and when it came, he never missed. But then, one day, something different appeared in the water. Somewhere around 1990, when Gustav may have been around 35 years old, there was a huge conflict in Burundi, a civil war. There were over 300,000 casualties, and in some regions, the rivers began to carry more than just water, people, because they had no better idea than to throw all of the bodies into the water. And crocodiles, like all predators, are opportunistic. And what happens when one of them begins to associate a new type of prey with food? No one can say exactly how often it happened, but during this time, crocodiles may have become more accustomed to human meat, and also their presence. Less cautious, less afraid. Because for most wild animals, humans are something to avoid, a potential threat. But when that line becomes blurred, the behavior can shift. Slowly, subtly, until one day, the water no longer feels safe. It's impossible to say whether Gustav was directly shaped by these events. There is no clear record. And maybe that's where the real story begins. Not with a monster, but with a changing environment. A river that had seen too much, and a predator that simply adapted to it. This was no good news for the people. In places like this, the river is part of their everyday life. It was just another encounter. One moment at the edge of the water, one movement, one strike, but something changed after that. Because predators learn, not in the way humans do, not with thoughts or decisions, but through repetitions, through instinct and through success. If something works once, it becomes part of the pattern. And over time, Gustav began to understand the river in a different way. Animals came to drink, well, that was expected, but so did people. At the same places, at the same time, following the same routines. And to a predator that had spent years watching the water, patterns are everything. The river was no longer just a hunting ground for animals. It had become something else, something more predictable, and slowly, the encounters became more frequent. Fishermen began noticing it first. Boats running with fewer people, stories of something large moving just beneath the surface, something that didn't behave like other crocodiles. To understand why Gustav terrified so many people, you have to understand how overpowered crocodile actually is. Because this isn't just another predator, this is something far older and far more dangerous. The Nile crocodile has existed on Earth for millions of years. Long before humans, long before most modern mammals, it survived mass extinctions, changing climates, entire ecosystem disappearing, and that's not by accident. Because crocodiles are built with something that almost feels like superpowers. With the first one being their strength. When they close their jaws, there is almost nothing that can pull free. Not antelope, not a zebra, not even large animals like buffalo. And once they grab something, they don't just hold on, they spin. A violent movement known as a death roll. Twisting their entire body in the water, tearing flesh, breaking bones, and dragging their prey beneath the surface. But even that isn't what makes them truly terrifying. The second superpower is that their metabolism is incredibly slow. They can go days and even weeks without eating, conserving energy in a way most animals simply can't. It's one of the reasons they have survived for so long, because crocodiles aren't built for speed, they are built to endure, and that endurance goes back a very long time. Crocodiles were already here when dinosaurs walked the earth. Not exactly the same species we see today, but close enough that their design barely needed to change. While entire groups of animals went extinct, crocodiles stayed, and some of their ancient relatives were even more terrifying. Take Deinosuchus for example, a prehistoric crocodilian that lived millions of years ago, large enough to hunt dinosaurs. It's hard to imagine something like that today, but in a way, every crocodile you see is a reminder of the past. The third superpower is invisibility, because most of the time you never see them. Crocodiles don't chase prey across the land like lions, they don't roar, they don't announce themselves, they wait. Hidden beneath the surface, completely silent until something gets too close. And before they realize, it's already too late. And it gets weirder, because they have a special transparent eyelid called nictitating membrane. It acts like building goggles, so when they go underwater, they can still see. And not just see, they can hunt. Which means, even when a crocodile looks like it's barely moving at the surface, it could be watching anything beneath it. But that's still not the weirdest thing about them. A crocodile's skin is covered with tiny pressure sensors, especially around the jaw. Yes, these dome-shaped pressure sensors are known as integumentary sense organs. Despite the tough, armor-like appearance of their skin, their sensors are extraordinarily sensitive to vibrations, water movements, and changes in pressure, and can detect even the smallest ripple in the water. Struggling fish, drinking animal, single splash. To us, it might feel like nothing, but to a crocodile, it's a signal. And once they detect it, they know exactly where to strike. And it doesn't end there, because crocodiles don't just growl or hiss, they rumble. A deep, low-frequency vibrations that travels through the water, not just a sound, but something you can actually feel. When a large crocodile lets out this rumble, the water around it begins to move. Tiny ripples form on the surface, almost like the water itself is reacting. And when you imagine a crocodile like Gustaf, an older, far heavier animal, producing that same rumble in the water, it becomes easier to understand why the stories about him spread so quickly. Because sometimes it's not what you see that creates fear, it's what you feel, before you even know something is there. He hunted villagers, fishermen, everyone. Villages along the river started talking about the crocodile that kept appearing. For the people living near the riverbanks, the stories were not just interesting, they were frightening. If this thing begins appearing near those same places, the river suddenly feels very different, because when the water is part of your everyday life, you can't avoid it. You still have to fish, still have to wash, you still have to go back to the same river every single day. But now something was waiting, and that's when the story began to change. Gustav was no longer just a crocodile, he was becoming a threat. Not because he was the only crocodile in the river, but because he was the one that people remembered. The one they talked about, the one they feared, the human hunter. And once fear takes hold, something else always follows. Action. Because eventually, people stopped telling stories and started trying to stop them. Hunters were ready to take this crocodile down. Traps were set, weapons were brought to the riverbanks. The goal was simple, find the crocodile and end it. But now, this was not a young animal, not careless, not easy to catch. This was a predator that spent years in the wild, avoiding danger, learning patterns, adapting. By this point, Gustaf had become a mystery. And now, the predator was no longer just hunting. It was being hunted, or so people thought. One of the most well-known attempts to capture Gustaf came from a French naturalist named Patrice Fay. He and his team traveled to Burundi with a plan. They built a massive cage trap, heavy metal bars, large enough to hold an enormous crocodile. The idea was simple, capture Gustaf alive, measure him, study him, finally prove whether the legend was real. But capturing this one would not be easy, because animals that live that long rarely make mistakes. Patrice Fay's team built a massive trap for exactly that purpose. Reports about the expedition describe a huge cage, roughly 30 feet long and weighing about 2,000 pounds, designed specifically to capture Gustaf alive. And for a while, it seemed like this might finally be the moment the legend became measurable. The trap was set, the bait was placed, a hidden infrared camera was installed inside, and now all they have to do was wait. But Gustaf never made it easy. Days passed, then more days, the bait remained untouched. The cage stood empty, and the longer that happened, the more unsettling the whole thing became. Because if Gustaf was as big, as old, and as experienced as people claimed, then maybe he wasn't avoiding trap by accident. Maybe he knew better. Maybe that was exactly how he stayed alive for so long. The team also tried giant snares placed along the banks, and those did catch crocodiles, just not Gustaf. And then came the strangest moment of all. Patrice Fay and other scientists attempted to capture Gustaf over a period of 2 years. Near the end of the expedition, a live goat was placed inside the cage as bait. But then a thunderstorm rolled in, and by the next morning, the cage was found partially submerged, and the goat was gone. The camera had failed, so nobody could say for certain what happened. Maybe the goat escaped, maybe the trap malfunctioned, or maybe Gustaf had come closer than anyone realized. And just like that, the biggest chance to prove the legend slipped away into the water. Part of Gustaf's legend came from the number attached to his name. For years, stories claimed he was responsible for hundreds of human deaths. In some version of the story, the number climbed past 300. That figure spread widely. But even here, the truth is much harder to pin down. More cautious estimates suggest the real number may have been far lower, possibly 60 or fewer. And that matters, because if you are telling the story well, the fear does not come from exaggeration, it comes from what's already real. So even if every number in the legend is not exact, the danger was and the fear was. And once a single crocodile becomes linked to repeated disappearances or attacks, something changes in the public imagination. It stops being just an animal, it becomes a presence. Warning passed from one generation to the next. And that's how legends grow, not from nowhere, but from something real enough to terrify people first. And then, just when it seemed like Gustaf became too famous to disappear, he did. Sightings became less frequent, the stories never stopped, but confirmed encounters became harder to find. Later, a travel writer in 2019 reported hearing that Gustaf had been killed, but nobody, no photograph and no hard evidence ever surfaced to confirm it, so his ending remained exactly what made him famous in the first place: uncertain. So, was Gustaf really a giant killer crocodile that haunted the rivers of Burundi for years? Possibly. Was it really as large as the most dramatic stories claimed? Maybe. Was he responsible for every attack attributed to him? That is far less certain. The cage trap was real, the expeditions were real, the fear in the region was very real, the sightings were real enough to keep researchers, filmmakers and journalists interested for years. But the full shape of the legend, that part may never be known. And maybe that's the point. Because out in the rivers of Central Africa, humans have never been completely in control. The water belonged to something older, something more patient, something that could disappear before anyone get too close. And in that sense, Gustaf was never just a crocodile. He was the fear of what might still be beneath the surface. Thank you for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, you can support me with a like, and for more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. And I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.